Hello, and welcome to my talk with the infamous title, Why IT Security is Fucked Up and What We Can Do About It. First, the talk I'm going to give here is parted into 4 parts. It's the introduction, why give I this talk. Then I will do a bit about social science and about psychology. And in the 4th part, I will give some hints what we might be able to do in the near future about IT security. First I would like to introduce myself. This beautiful machine here is an East German Robotron small computer from 1985, 1.4 megahertz, and a data set. You can see here that the data was stored on musical cassettes, and that's how I learned programming in 1987. And since then I've been interested in information technology, IT security, and hacking. I am the head of the Magdeburg Institute of Security Research. We are a privately founded and financed research institute in Germany. We also have our own security research journal, which is open access. I'm the founder and editor also of the journal, and we are publishing currently the proceedings for the DeepSec. So some of the speakers here at DeepSec provided us articles we published there in our journal. I've been a hacker for 20 years. I've been involved in the NetBSD project as a developer for some time. I work as a freelance security consultant, and I studied educational science and psychology in Germany, which means I have a very unique view onto IT security. And I'm currently doing a joint degree program with a German university and an English university in Essex about education and international vocational education. So I'm also interested in how educational systems in other countries work, because our German training system is a bit different from the rest of the world. I do a lot of research about social engineering, security awareness, and organizational security. I like psychological profiling for social engineering. It's a talk I gave 2 years ago, and henceforth my point of view is a more psychological one. So I was once a techie or a typical nerd. Now I'm more into psychology. We do run a research program which is named Psychology of Security. I introduced it at last year's DeepSec. And we do research, for example, about the perception of security, which is necessary fundamental research. We also do fundamental research about personality, attitudes, and security. Think of personality traits. How do they play into the field of security, like openness, consciousness, and so on. Organizational development and security. It's a field of organizational psychology, which is very important in organizations. Cultural differences, didactics, that's my playground. How do we teach security? And what is to be taught? Teaching something about IT security is also the question, what do we want to teach? And that's our research. I gave a talk last year at the Australian AusCERT conference, the Australian Computer Emergency Response Team. And the title of that talk was Security in a Post-NSA Age. And the research question of the talk I gave was, can there be security in a post-NSA age? Because, as we all know, since Snowden, the 5 Eyes, are they an almighty adversary? If you're interested in philosophy, you know probably the concept of panopticon, which was made famous mostly by Pierre Bourdieu. It's the idea of building a prison in such a way that there is a tower for the prison guards, and this tower enables the prison guards to watch and look into each and every cell at any given time, without the prisoners knowing if they're being monitored or not. And the idea behind this, it's very deep-rooted in behavioristic theory, that fearing being monitored around the clock, the prisoners will learn to behave. They will be trained into becoming a valuable subject of society. He discussed it in several books, and now we have the discussion about the so-called panspectron, which means philosophers are currently discussing a society where we don't have one guard tower that can look into ourselves, into our life, but we have a society where devices like our mobile phones, tablets, computers, or even our smart fridge is linked up to Amazon and buys our favorite yogurt. So we are now being monitored by devices in our life. We are looking at each other via Twitter, Facebook, and co. And the rest of the world is also looking into us. And that changes society. And it has effects on human behavior. It has effects on societies and how societies work. So the Snowden papers were a shock for a lot of persons, probably not for you, because we are into the field of IT security. We know what can go wrong and we know what goes wrong. And so I try to discuss this problem at the talk. My suggestion was, oh God, that there will of course be security in a post-NSA field. There has to be security. And I wanted to discuss some problems and ideas. And my personal thing was that I wanted to have a more holistic view, read not just technical. We should just not discuss only technology. I'm also very fond of sociological system theory. I will go explain later what it is. And second-order cybernetics. Second-order cybernetics is a great tool to think about your own cognitive bias, and as we had it in the last talk. As a psychologist, I can use psychology to discuss human behavior and experience. That's actually the definition of psychology we use in Germany. Psychology is the science of human behavior and experience. And another thing is we have to reflect on the foundation of our science. This is the field where philosophy comes back into the play. Theory of science, philosophy of science, history of science, and so on. And then we have to discuss how useful those methods are. Methods only work in certain fields. You can't use the methods we use in electrical engineering or computer science for every field we have to discuss in IT security. For example, human behavior can usually not be discussed with computer science methods because that field is psychology. There was a tweet at Twitter by a guy called Outrage as a Service about my talk I gave there in Australia. And he just wrote, "Science is awesome, you aren't doing science in InfoSec, why not?" Seems to be the overriding message of Kaisha Konen, which is my Twitter handle. I thought about that and said, that's actually a good talking point which I was giving. So why aren't we doing science? And that led to my conclusion, please stand back, I'm going to try science. So let's bring more science into the field of InfoSec. And science in the sense of doing something professional, which means we have to find our methods, tools, and so on. So the consequences for us has to be we have to change how security works after the Snowden papers, or we have to do it at least now. And we also have to discuss what research has to be done and how it has to be done in which field, and how we can bring together the different fields of IT security or the different fields of science. And like I already said, I'm a huge fan of sociological system theory, which was mostly developed by a German sociologist named Niklas Luhmann. It was also influenced by the Vienna-born Heinz von Förster, who was originally a physicist, and he developed radar stations and control systems for rockets for the German Wehrmacht during Second World War, and he was later invited to the US, where he became one of the founding fathers of cybernetics, or cybernetic system theory. The cybernetic guys met in the 1950s and 60s at several conferences, and they thought that it might be a good idea to use the cybernetic methods and tools they have to create a society. I think of books like 1948, or the Russian Yevgeny Samyatin wrote a book in Russian about such a society. It's called Moi, or We in English. And it's a really great book, what happens when people try to design a society. And fortunately, many of those scientists into cybernetics realized that the method they use in physics don't work well in social engineering, in the old sense of the word, which means they can't design a society like they do design physical systems or engineered systems. He later thought about these problems and what leads to the problems that humans behave in a different way than machineries. And this has been exploited or has been introduced into social science, mostly by two Argentinian biologists, Maturana and Varela. They published a book about the biology of perception, and they said one famous sentence in that book: anything said is said by an observer. And in the moment when you accept that anything said is said by an observer, you come to the conclusion that there is no such thing as objectivity in science or in perception. And we had the talk about cognitive bias. Of course, as a psychologist, I totally agree with the conclusions of the last talk, which means everything we see is seen through our eyes and through our biography and how we perceive the world. It's influenced by our language, by our sex, by our gender, by other cultures. So everything said is said by an observer and only applies to the one seeing and saying it. If you want to reflect about how we perceive the world, try to reflect on what biases influence us, we could use second-order cybernetics. And second-order cybernetics is using cybernetics on a cybernetic system, which means actually when we are active in a field, like developing a program or doing something in science, we are using first-order cybernetics. We are doing something. In the moment we discuss how we construct our perception, how we work, how our field actually works. We are doing second-order cybernetics. And this is very, very, very prominent in social science and psychology. We do a lot of reflection about what we do, why we do it that way we're doing it, how could it be done other. There are huge debates going on about several methods. For example, there were huge debates about quantitative data versus qualitative data or qualitative research. Do we need big statistics? A lot of psychologists want to do a lot of statistics because then they have math, and when we have math, we do science. And this is, of course, a debate because math or statistical data cannot explain human behavior at a fundamental level. We do need qualitative research about that. So we just should discuss the question, what the hell are we doing here? And why are we doing it the way we are doing it? And that has to be done to bring RT security and RT security research more forward. Another thing that has to be introduced into the whole discussion is trust, but not trust. It is often used in computer science. Can computer Alice trust computer Bob? But I suggest to use the explication of trust Niklas Luhmann used in his 1968 book, which is in German called Vertrauen, or in English published as Trust and Power, because he explicated, he thought about how trust is used in society, and he identified as a mechanism to reduce social complexity, which means whenever there is complexity that has to be resolved by us, we don't actually resolve it, but we delegate or move away the complexity by issuing trust. You are listening to me and you're trusting that I know what I'm talking about because I'm a scientist. If you want to become a psychotherapist in Germany, you have to have a master's of science and psychology. You have to get at least a 2-year training and other stuff, and that's a system of trust introduced into this field. So the normal layperson is usually not able to define or discuss if someone is actually a psychotherapist. So the politicians set up laws that try to reduce the complexity by setting standards for us. Another thing Luhmann uses in a theory is that the social complexity is reduced with functional specialized subsystems. So at one point in our history, societies began to divert into several subsystems. We had farmers, we had hunters, we had gatherers, and now we have IT security experts, we have politicians, we have lawmakers, we have engineers, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, and so on. So the more progress and the more complexity we bring into our society, the more specialized subsystems we need. And IT security and computer science is, in the field of science, a very new subsystem. For example, philosophy is the oldest subsystem of science we have. Mechanical engineering is also very old, electrical engineering very new, and computer science even younger. So these are theories they use to describe a society, and I think we should use this theory to think about ourselves, about our function in society as IT security experts. The consequences we have to draw are that we have to professionalize beyond technical problems. Discovering each and every buffer overflow of the week won't fix fundamental problems. Of course, it is important to discuss the technical problems. It is important to discuss each and every buffer overflow, but we also have to think about why the hell are we having still these buffer overflow problems. From a psychological point of view, think of human factors and such. Actually, every programmer should know that buffer overflow are there, that they can occur, and how to be avoided, because it's actually not that hard to avoid in buffer overflow, but yet still they are there. And there are programmers or people writing programs who never studied computer science. For example, a lot of electrical engineers working in the field of automatization hack programs, and they never learned about algorithms, data structures, buffer overflows, format string vulnerabilities, and so on. And that's a huge problem we have to discuss. We have to analyze the human factors that come into mind. That might be personality traits, organizational traits, management of human factors, and so on. We have to think about information security, not just technical security. We have to create a new scientific field of information security. There are new scientific fields created, not on a daily basis, but we do this. Computer science is a new science, a relative new science. In Germany in the 1980s, we merged management and economics and computer science into our business informatics or business computer science, because there is a unique field this science can operate in. We have to include psychology, social science, educational science, didactics, and others. We have to make information security measurable by this science. We cannot only use standards as used, for example, by the German standardization body or by NIST or other bodies. We have to create a new vocational field of information security. There was a talk about closing the skills gap, and that's a huge problem. We have to create professions and vocations about IT security. And this has to be done for each and every country and culture in its unique way. So the way we are going to do it in Germany will probably not transfer to England because our vocational education and training systems differ so much. But it has to be done. And the fundamental research is unique. We can do it for each and every country, but how each and every country then goes on and creates its own professional fields is a thing that has to be discussed within the country. And this all has to be backed by science. The thing is, I'm a consultant for IT security. I do a lot of security awareness, and whenever I did security awareness, I did it actually led by my gut feelings. And that's something as a psychologist I don't like, because as a psychologist I'm actually trained to do these things based on scientific methods. Yet I cannot do it because we don't have all the methods we need to do, for example, a security awareness campaign. So I spoke a lot about psychology, which is not surprising as being a psychologist. But now I would like to show a bit more why psychology is so important for this field. What is psychology? Psychology is an empirical science, and it's also a theoretical science. A lot of people think of Sigmund Freud when they hear psychology. He was a theoretical scientist. He analyzed literature, and based on his knowledge of antique and classic literature, he created theories of human behavior. And there were huge debates with his students, Alfred Adler and others, and there were schisms and they broke up. But the first psychologists, or people who later led to the creation of psychology, did it in a theoretical way. Then later we introduced empirical methods, things like questionnaires, standardization, standardized tests, and so on. So we brought math into the field of psychology to make it more sciencey, because math is sexy and math is science. The definition of psychology we use in Germany, I like it more than the English definition, is because that psychology describes, explains, and predicts human behavior and experiences. And if you talk about security, we talk about human behavior and human experience. Every bias we have, every cognition we have is human behavior. And some years ago I was asked at a conference if I believe in this thing of felt security, if someone can feel about security or having a security sense. And that's, from my point of view as a psychologist, the only way of security we have, or the only kind of security we have. So we have different fields in psychology, like personality psychology, social psychology, which is actually social engineering, for example, industrial psychology, organizational and pedagogical psychology. What has this to do with security? The first thing we have to discuss is what is security actually, or how can we define, explicate, or create a model of security we can use in this scientific field to be created. In the German informatics courses, we use a definition called Viva criterion. In German, the words form or begin with the letter VIVA, which leads to the name Viva. In English, it means confidentiality, integrity, availability, and authenticity of a technical system. That's how we define security in IT security, or IT security in Germany in computer science. And whenever we discuss it, we look at these criterions and we check if they are met within a system. For example, confidentiality of an email system is not given because we have the possibility of man-in-the-middle attacks or something else. So we have to introduce cryptography to meet the criterion of confidentiality and so on. I think it's time for a paradigm shift because we have to change or add something more to this definition. We have to get at least one broader definition to be used in this broader field of science. If you're interested in the concept of paradigm or a paradigm shift, you have to read Thomas S. Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolution. He wrote about the history of science. It's a very debated book. It's still very debated. And he identified a mindset or a distinct concept of thought patterns and basic assumptions within fields of science, and they change over time. For example, he wrote about how medieval or physicists in the 17th and 18th century thought about electrical phenomena. They didn't know about electricity as we know it today, so they had to make assumptions, and this is a mindset that exists. And sometimes these mindsets or paradigms have to change. They change, and this is called paradigm shift. And that's what I want to do, change the paradigm of IT security as we use it today. A definition I use in my works is security is a latent social construct, which means latent is it cannot be directly measured. A construct is something I cannot go and measure with a tape or a scale or something else. The most famous construct we use in psychology, and which is also mostly misunderstood by laypersons, is the intelligence quotient, IQ. Several societies heavily rely on IQ tests. We don't use them much in Germany, but in the US they are more common. And intelligence is a construct that has to be measured by different variables. And that's what I think security is also about. So that means we have a construct that cannot be directly measured. We have to find variables which enable us to measure security. It is also social in the sense of it is constructed within a society. I think a lot of people using Reddit and other websites know the idea of death by fan in Korea. In the 1950s, the South Korean government wanted to save energy, electrical energy, so they set up a rumor in the society that if you leave your fan on during night, you will die because of hypothermia. So you will basically freeze to death if you leave your fan running during the night. They promoted that lie, it is a lie, because they wanted to save electrical energy. And now this has been so manifested or ingrained into South Korean society that many people actually believe in it, because they have been brought up believing it. And this is a social construct of security, because no one in Western Europe or in the US would believe in this thing if he doesn't have a connection to South Korean culture. Another thing also often discussed in programming is the cargo cult. You know, in the Second World War, the American Air Force dropped boxes with supplies for American foods on small jungle islands, and a lot of Aborigines living there found those boxes and thought there are gods coming by and dropping off goods, and so they set up a religion, a cult based on these American supply airplanes going on. And this has been well researched, well documented, and it is already being discussed by computer scientists in programming technologies or programming techniques. So the connection is already there. What does security and psychology now have to do with each other? Security is concluded by making decisions. It's about a human making a decision. And individuals make decisions based on their biography, the situation, and how they perceive their environment. In organizational psychology, we speak of person-organization fit. So you have the person, the organization, and the situation at which people behave different. Before Walter Mischel published several papers, there was the idea in psychology that every person behaves the same way in every situation. So if you do one test, for example, about intelligence or another personality trait or behavior, they will show the same behavior in each and every situation throughout their whole life. And Walter Mischel changed that paradigm because he could show that the organization and the situation also influence human behavior. So someone who is very security aware on Monday at 9 o'clock might not be that security aware Friday 12 p.m. because he had a long working day, he's hungry, he wants to go home, or whatever there comes into play in these factors. So we have to think about all these situations. Psychology is the science which researches these topics. Therefore, psychology is required to research security. When we speak about security, we have to speak about human behavior. Why do programmers still produce buffer overflows and format string vulnerabilities and so on? Why are there programming teams that produce errors? Psychology is the only science able to research the basic fundamentals of security, because the basic fundamental of security is human behavior. I have another example which is quite popular. It's about a paradigm that had to be shifted 150 years ago. It's about washing your hands. In the 1830s, 40s around, there were two maternity clinics here in Vienna. The first one, the General Hospital, which still exists, was led by medical doctors. The second was only led by midwives. It was run by the Catholic Church, and they trained nuns to become midwives. And it was known that more pregnant women died in the first one. The hospital run by medical doctors, the professionals who work professionally in the field of medicine. Pregnant women were allowed to give birth there for free. It was funded by the royal family here in Vienna, so they didn't have to pay for the hospitals if they went to the hospital. But many pregnant women would rather give birth in the streets, which were rather dirty at the time, than be sent to the first clinic with the medical doctors, because they were afraid of dying in there. Ignaz Semmelweis was a medical doctor born in Pest, the part of Budapest, and working here in Vienna. And he thought about that, and he said, what the hell is going on? Why are midwives better at delivering babies than we are as medical professionals? And he thought about that, he did experiments and other stuff, and he discovered that physicians transmit pathogenic agents by cadaverous poisoning. So the medical doctor at that time went to visited a person who was ill, treated them, and then they went on to help the women delivering their babies. And they transmitted those pathogenic agents by cadaverous poisoning. And he proposed that the physicians should wash their hands. He introduced a program where every medical doctor, after every visit to a patient, had to wash his hands, and the death rate dropped by 90%, which is a very strong correlation of both things, the death rate and the behavior of the medical doctors. How were his ideas received in Vienna? His idea was rejected by his fellow medical doctors. He was considered to be crazy, and he was psychiatrized by force in a Vienna hospital. So his colleagues, medical doctors, ignored his experiments and findings and sent him to the psychiatry, where he died later in Budapest as a bitter old man. And this behavior can be explained by psychology. We did a lot of research about it. It's just one example. There are much more examples going on. And coming to my favorite example, coming into IT security, many of you might remember the first flight of Ariane 5, the flight 501 in 1996. That's how it ended after 35 seconds. Nice firework worth 300,000 million euro. What was the problem? To make it short, there's a huge report produced by the ESA. You can look it up, and one of the problems, not the only factor, but one of the factors was that the Ariane 5 development crew used the software of Ariane 4. Ariane 4 had a much lower acceleration than Ariane 5, but Ariane 5 having these higher acceleration, the sensors ran into buffer overflows, and this was known. They could calculate at which acceleration they will run into a buffer overflow, or into a string conversion or a conversion error, and it was documented in the manual, in the handbook of the software of Ariane 4. It was documented there that this problem exists, and if you are developing a rocket with a higher acceleration, you have to keep this problem in mind and change the software. But unfortunately, the development crew of Ariane 5 ignored it. So there was a problem, it was well known, it was documented. So everything we know or we do in knowledge management was done right, yet the Ariane 5, the first flight, explored. And this is another field of psychology. We have industrial psychology, organizational psychology, social psychology, how people make decisions, how groups influence decision making, how their biographies influence decision making. And this is going on a daily basis in every computer or in every development team, in every programmer team, in every security team when we're doing security. This is also going on when we have our group meetings of psychologists and social scientists thinking about psychology and social science, because we are not, we also have the same problems because they apply to everyone, or each and everyone. So what do we have to do? We should think about societal problems. For example, there's a phenomenon called digital divide. I also teach at a German institution called Volkshochschule, which means it's the school developed 120 years ago, which offers cheap courses for the working class. And I teach there ICT, information computer technology, for the elderly, read everyone older than 50, and they have no clue of how computers work, and I teach them how security works. And there is currently a digital divide going on in society between those who know how computers work, who can handle them, and those who don't. And this is mostly based on an age gap. So elderly people usually don't know as much about computers as others. But there's another problem we face here about, it's a cognitive bias. For example, we do research projects about IT security in small companies in Germany. A lot of the heads of small companies have no idea how IT works. They don't know how computer science works, how computers work, and they think that the trainees they get know how computers work because they do have a Twitter account, they know how Facebook works, and they have a nice, shiny smartphone where the Twitter app is installed or another app. And sometimes they even have a trainee who already installed a pirated computer game and changed maybe a video card. So he is the IT expert in the company, and his limited knowledge about IT security sets the whole behavior of the organization in regards to IT and IT security. So there is a huge thing to discuss. We have to discuss about economy and IT, but I think the talk tomorrow by Linus Neumann will go more into detail there. Checks and balances about politics. How do politicians decide about things they don't understand? That's a huge problem. Politicians cannot know or cannot be expert in each and every field. That's how our governmental forms in Western Europe or Europe and, for example, the US are usually designed. Max Weber, a famous German sociologist, published several papers about it in 1919, so almost 100 years ago, about science as profession and politics as profession or vocation. And he thought about these processes going on. Those of you who are into social science know his name from the theory of bureaucracy. How do scientists work in society? Why and how did Rheindale become AES? What happened there? You mostly remember the discussion we had about DES. The NSA was involved and IBM, and did they introduce a backdoor? Did they weaken the key and everything else? These are societal problems. Computer scientists or mathematicians can discuss and analyze Rheindale or AES, but they cannot discuss and analyze all the processes going on there, all the cognitive biases, the decision-making, the group behavior, organizational behavior, conspiracy theories, and so on. Are the Illuminati involved in the creation of NSA or AES? It's mostly bullshit, but people believe in this because that's their worldview. Another thing, I'm also published several papers or added my point of view to the discussion about cyber war and cyber terror in Germany. I published a paper on cyber terrorism this year for the German Department of Defense. And the thing is there, it's usually discussed by political scientists. So there have been papers published, at least in Germany, by political scientists, by some guys from the military, and they don't understand technology. I just had a debate with a social scientist. She does a lot of very great qualitative research, and she wanted to research anonymous, but she was afraid because they will come and hack her. And she will then probably die because they are able to kill her via computer. You see these hackers can turn your computer into a bomb parody hanging around here, but she really believed in this because she has no idea of how IT works. She has a lot of great skills and methods from her social science background, but she doesn't understand technology. And if you want to discuss cyber terror, cyber war, anonymous hacktivism, and so on, you have to bring both together. There are also discussions by ITSec who often don't understand social implications. So when I asked my friends coming from a technical background, hey, I'm writing a paper on cyber terror, do you want to proofread it or add your ideas? They often said, what the fuck, that's bullshit, there is no such thing as cyber terror. Of course, that's also what I wanted to conclude, but I have to do it in a way that politicians, military, and so on believe me or can understand me and follow my argument I'm giving there. They don't understand that there are social implications, even if it doesn't exist. As long as people believe it exists, it has influence on their behavior. And this also by politicians. Politicians work in a complete different mindset. If the population is afraid of terror, they have to do something against terrorism, and even if it's just theater, security theater, you probably know the term coined by Bruce Schneier, about all the checks at the airport, it's mostly security theater to keep us calm. It doesn't work. Now think of this ban of liquids aboard. You can also build a bomb with 100 milliliters of liquid, or you can bring in a baby bottle, bottle, fill it with explosives and bomb up the plane. If you have no scruples to bomb up 300 persons in a plane, you can also add another baby to bring it as an alibi. So it's just a theater. No? And if we think about it in a scientific way, it usually hurts our brain because it's driven by politicians and how they have to operate and work. It's discussed by the military who, as I have been in the military for some years, often don't understand anything. They are just operating in a very blind field, but they are driven by politicians. They want to get money. They want to be sexy for recruits and people working for them, so they publish a lot of paper which are mostly bullshit bingo. And of course we also have the legal experts. They often don't understand technology and often don't understand social implications, but they have to work in this field because terrorism is actually a field defined by law. There are laws defining what terrorism is, and there are huge debates going on if some group is just criminal or terrorist, because if they are terrorists, they will get much harsher sentences than if they are just criminals. And this is currently the debate going on in almost every Western society. So if you want to discuss anonymous hacktivism, we have to do it in a holistic view. We have to bring these disciplines together, work with each other, don't laugh about the others because of the methods. We don't have to laugh about computer science because they use math, and vice versa, the computer scientists and mathematicians don't have to laugh about social scientists or psychologists who use qualitative methods. Just because something isn't able to be spoken in math or using math as a language doesn't mean it is not science. But this is currently a huge debate, at least in Germany, going on. So the computer scientists don't want to talk to the philosophers and social scientists because they are not doing science, from their point of view. We should reflect about what we are doing. The information technology of society, what is going on and what are we doing here? The hackers of society, the intelligence services of society. The idea of society is actually a lot of titles by Niklas Luhmann, where he reflected on subsystems of society. For example, the education of society, the political system of society, and so on. And we are a subsystem of our society, and we have to reflect about what is going on. And think about this. So, if anyone knows social scientists who are good in this field, invite them to come here next year. Conclusion, IT security needs its own research field, security research, or however we want to call it, with its own foundation, methods, and tools. And these have to be rooted in, of course, mathematics as formal science, computer science and electrical engineering as engineering science. I don't have to explain why. We do also need social sciences like sociology, political science, and others. Jurisprudence as normative science, because if you think about things like anonymous, cyber terrorism, lawyers play a big role, and the creation of laws also plays a big role. Or how are these laws created? Philosophy is the mother of all sciences, and many people don't know that philosophy has no borders, no limitations. Philosophy is the only science that is not a subsystem of something else. Philosophy is the general science, the science that can discuss each and everything. Philosophers can do this because they are the mother, the creation or creator of all sciences. Every science we now have is somehow rooted in philosophy. Now, educational science or pedagogy, actually a Greek term which means the leader or the guide of young boys, because those were Greek slaves used by the Romans to train their sons, is the second scientific field created from philosophy. And each and every other scientific field can be brought or can be reduced back to philosophy. And actually the idea of science and humanities, or the split of two cultures of science and humanity, isn't that old. If you go back 200 years or 250 years, the idea of natural scientists didn't exist. They were called natural philosophers. Darwin was a natural philosopher. And psychology is not only important because we discuss human behavior and perception of reality, but psychology itself is also a bit special in the field of science because we are a so-called hub science. We are also rooted in mathematics. We are rooted in philosophy. There is a huge philosophical field in psychology, mostly all the stuff done by Freud and co. We have qualitative research, quantitative research. We bring in standardized tests and so on. We have a lot of fields. We have natural science in it, neuroscience, neuropsychology, all these shiny, colorful pictures produced by fMRI, and currently the absolute hipster tool or the absolute hip tool are more rooted in biology and medicine, but we also have other fields. And we are in this kind special because we aren't neither a social science nor a natural science. We are a bit of everything. So we know how to handle these situations. So I made a small mind map about what each field can do. I left out computer science, math, and electrical engineering because most of you know about this. But we could discuss, for example, in psychology, the human factors, perceptions of security, research methods, a huge field about becoming a psychologist in Germany. Psychologists only allowed to study at our universities. We have two different kinds of universities. And the Universität is actually a scientific research university. The idea was created by Humboldt. It was later copied by other universities like MIT. And that means when you study psychology in Germany, you have to go through research methods. And this is taught very thoroughly because psychology is defined that you use these research methods and tools. We can also reflect about personality traits and security. We have to invite political science for things like governance, policy creation, normative processes going on in society. What is cyber terror? Can a 15-year-old Dutch script kiddie be tried as a terrorist because they used a DDoS tool to shut down American Express Survivor? This happened. It was the Operation Payback. And the Dutch government or the Dutch judges had to discuss if this guy is just a script kiddie, which might get off with 20 hours social work, or if he's a terrorist who has to be sent off to something like Guantanamo Bay. And this is to be discussed by political science and jurisprudence. Pedagogy, of course, a huge field, training, didactics, curriculum development. How do we teach security? What do we teach in security? What has to be included? Whom do we have to teach? Well, that depends on how your country organizes its training fields. In Germany, we have a good system working with apprenticeships. 60% of our education don't go to university. They have usually an apprenticeship degree. And we have different fields in which those people work. So if you have a university degree, you're usually going to management. If you have an apprenticeship, you usually go to middle management or to the organization you work in. We have to bring it into schools. We're currently working on this in my federal state, as the educational system is organized by every federal state on its own in Germany. We are doing this in my home state, and we talk with schools, with teachers. They are usually deathly afraid of using IT. Those are the teachers who teach social science. We always try to invite them to our talks about computer games and violence, about cybermobbing and other phenomena, and they are usually interested until they hear that we bring in computer scientists and also do a bit about IT, because they don't want to know anything. They don't want to hear anything about how computers work. They are deadly afraid of them. And bringing the politicians to accept that this has to be brought into schools is a huge problem. The economy usually is standing there and crying. The company said, we need well-skilled, trained labor for our companies. They have to know this, this, and this. Then there is the huge debate going on as described by the talk about the skills gap. So this is also a huge field. And of course, philosophy as philosophy of science and mother of all sciences, and sociology in industrial organizational sociology and systems of a society. So these are the fields we can work in. We have to bring them together. We can bring them together in the center in information security. And this is where the journey will go on. This will probably happen, no matter if I give this talk or not, because we can already see the shifts in the paradigms. We can see how different researchers from different fields now come together. When I was here in 2008, it was my first DeepSec I've been a speaker in. I gave a talk about the psychological fundamentals of social engineering, and I was the only one with a psychological background here on the speakers, and now we have finally, luckily, more people from this point of view. So yeah, these are just my 2 Eurocents about IT security and what will go on. If you want to contact me, you can do so via email. This is our website. The website is mostly in German, but the journal is also available in English, or some of the articles are in English, mostly those from the DeepSec proceedings. We have a YouTube channel, mostly German talks, but also some DeepSec talks. You can follow or harass me on Twitter. You can contact me on Xing, it's a German LinkedIn version. You can use PGP to encrypt your email. And if you trust me, you can also use this QR code with your mobile phones to get my business card. So I'm done, and I think we still have some minutes left for questions, discussions, flame wars, and so on.
Thank you for your talk. Little question. You talk about cooperation between different fields, which is really interesting. But at the European scale, for example, I heard from some teachers that they really want to teach IT security at the university, but IT security is considered in a lot of countries as strategic assets, and the people who knows the technology are considered as strategic people, and they don't want foreign people to study, the university in France, for example, don't want to teach IT security to foreigners, and that's why they are not quite ready to open IT security formations. Well, what do you think about it, and what is your view in Germany about this problem?
The German science or scientific field is a bit unique in the way that we have guaranteed by our basic law, by our constitution, that science and teaching is to be free. And actually, if you do something as a professor in Germany, no one can tell you how to do it and what to do once you are a professor. And there have been a lot of debate about ethical hacking. Are we allowed to publish security problems and other stuff? And I think that's the way how to do science. Because if the universities say we limit ourselves by excluding foreigners, they are just shooting themselves not only in the foot, but they're blowing away the whole knee and the whole leg. And if you think about history, I think until Bill Clinton, there was this cryptography as an arms act by the US government, which led to the US cryptographers being excluded from the international scientific conferences and other stuff. And that's actually a very stupid idea. And especially if you do it at universities and science, because the freedom of science is one fundamental right we do need and we have to hold it upright. Because if you look back in our history, some 100 years, or to other countries, limiting science is not a good idea.
So you talked a little bit about the negative side of using terms like cyber war or cyber terror. But I just wanted to point out there are also positives to having that, and that it makes for a spectacular drinking game when you're watching television. But more seriously, I think that the divide between the general public and this concept of information security is very wide. And in order to use the communication mediums that are available for us to bridge that divide, we have to make it able to be sold.
Yes.
We have to have it presented in such a way that A, people will pay attention, and B, the owners of those communication mediums will allow us to use them.
Yes.
So if we're not using terms like cyber terror and cyber war, what sort of strategies would you suggest in place of that?
I think, I also had to do with journalists here at DeepSec and other conferences, and I think I know how they have to work as journalists, and I know how we as scientists work, and this is a huge problem about public relations between scientists, because as you might know, for example, on Reddit, every week there comes the ultimate cure for cancer, because some study has been published with a little correlation between two things, and then the journalists go on and we found the cure. And journalists have to be honest. There has to be quality journalism. There are some journalists who do quality journalism. There are a lot of media and companies that don't do quality journalism, and I think I'm a bit pessimistic on that. We can't fight them, and we can't ignore them. They will talk about us no matter if we talk to them or not. If they think cyber terrorism is a great buzzword, they will use it, no matter if we agree that it doesn't exist or not. So this is actually a very controversial and very problematic field. And even I've also seen quality media writing bullshit about IT security, because journalists are also, they are specialists in everything and nothing, as some journalists said. So, and yeah, regarding the drinking games, the beer in Germany is so good, we don't do drinking games. We just drink it so.
No more questions? So thank you, Stefan.
Thanks.